Hi, Mr. Chair and members. Mira Girton here today on behalf of the California Chamber of Commerce, and also was asked to testify on behalf of the California Restaurants Association in opposition to SB 747. To the extent that we're here today, as the author mentioned, to have a conversation about public health and what we can do about it, the Chamber is very happy to be a part of that conversation, and we think that we're good. It's good that that conversation is happening. Our employers, this is not just about the cost of the public health system, it's also about the cost to employers who are also dealing with and growing healthcare costs, and so we do need to address those impacts. But we're also here today to talk about a specific approach of how to address those, and that is, why we are opposed. So, I think on the one hand, this bill is very broad. It covers potentially everything that you'll find in a grocery store or a pharmacy or a drugstore. On the other hand, it's very simplistic. It tries to get a department to draw a conclusion, a causal relationship between impacts that, where we have data about correlation between use of a product and a public health impact, and then draw a causal relationship. And so we have a lot of concern about the breadth and oversimplicity of that approach. It also runs the risk of being duplicative. I know I just received some language from the author's office before we got here, trying to address some of that duplication. I don't think it quite gets us there. We can still have a lot of different federal and state agencies with dual jurisdiction over all of these products that would be addressed by the bill, and so you don't really provide any of the certainty or guarantee that, if one agency decides it's unwise to regulate it, that another agency won't decide to do it anyway. The author also mentioned that they're trying not to create a private right of action. We do have concerns still, though, that there will be litigation that will arise out of the information manufacturers would have to provide. You can still have a product liability suit, and once a manufacturer has said, these are things that we could do to help mitigate the impact, if they don't do that, that could give rise to litigation. So we actually do think that there will still be lawsuits resulting from this. We also just have basic questions about the feasibility of what the Department of Public Health is being asked to do here, how to identify these consumer products. We have a lot of data out there about some products and showing a correlation relationship, but causal relationships are more complicated. You have individual behavior, you have genetics, you have education, you have access issues. All of that contributes to these epidemics. And so then asking the agency to use correlative data to then give one consumer product or one industry responsibility for trying to mitigate all of the harms, we think that's an inappropriate approach, and we don't think it really works. And it could actually result in just a few industries being targeted because there's data, not even because they actually are having the largest impact on those public health epidemics. And lastly, there's some competitiveness issues that are raised here. I definitely appreciate the Senator's concern about not wanting to impose a burden on small businesses, but 80% of market share probably will capture a significant number of small businesses depending on the product. And then you have an issue of, 20% of their competitors don't have to comply, don't have to pay a fee, don't have to provide this information, don't have to share trade secrets that then are accessible to the public. And so that raises a lot of concerns about what the impact will be on other manufacturers down the line. And in the end, we may come to a place where we decide we definitely do want to regulate it. There's a role for the state and for agencies to play in this conversation. But if we do, we want to make sure that whatever burden we're imposing on businesses is justified with an equal payoff. And here we now have all of the end game removed from the legislation. There's no longer even a reporting requirement to the legislature. So we kind of ask, why are businesses being asked to step up and do this if at the end of the day there's no guarantee we'll have any benefit on the public? And so for those reasons, we remain opposed. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we move forward, I perhaps maybe should have stated this before we started the hearing. In light of the fact that there was not as much support, if we can limit the opposition to maybe 4, you kind of figure out who, if you need to speak more, let us know. And then if I feel like there's too much time going to the opposition, we'll allow the support to either counter or bring some additional witnesses up. But otherwise, it seems like we can just, and try to not duplicate the comments, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members, Ralph Simoni representing the Grocery Manufacturers Association. GMA is a national association of multinational companies that provide food, beverage, healthcare products throughout the country and throughout the world. Although the author is certainly well-intentioned in his effort, I think that as the proponent witnesses described, this is a very innovative proposal, and it doesn't quite thread the needle the way a bill like this should. There are a lot of flaws in this bill. In fact, I think one fatal flaw is the fact that it picks on specific products, not specific ingredients. So when you think this through, if you would think of alcohol, if you would think of obesity or diabetes, is it just that product, or is it all products that contain those ingredients? So this bill would essentially empower Department of Public Health to select a particular product of the day and go after that product when in fact it could only be a portion or a small portion of the overall epidemic that Senator Desaulniers chooses to address. So as you know, I don't know how you would implement on a product by product basis. So I think that has to be reconciled at some point. Also, and I think the Chamber did a very good job in addressing this, when you look at the specific proposal of this bill on page 4, lines 4 and line 6, it requires a risk assessment, which is a specific document. It requires the manufacturer submitting that to identify all of the public health impacts and then list mitigation on line 6, but it doesn't require anything, and as the Chamber said, we fear that this is going to be an open checkbook for private rights of action, an open checkbook for litigation for anybody who is ultimately selected with a product that may have a minor contribution to the health epidemic, to then essentially give the blueprint for a complaint to a plaintiff's attorney. So we think this bill has a lot of fundamental flaws. Although we certainly recognize the intentions of the author, we don't believe this bill is ready to move on at this point.
Catherine Pettibone, the Civil Justice Association of California. I think my colleagues covered our litigation concerns.
Mr. Chair, Member Shane Levine on behalf of the California Retailers Association, also for the reasons stated, we are in opposition. Thank you.
Mike Rogie with the California Manufacturers and Technology Association. I'd just like to add that this really gives the Department of Public Health unfettered and unprecedented discretion on how they're going to run this program. And I don't think that's something that you really want to do. Thank you. We're in opposition.
Nicole Quinones on behalf of the Consumer Specialty Products Association, also in opposition.
John Hanley with the California Independent Grocers Association, in opposition.
Margot Parks on behalf of the Family Winemakers of California, in opposition.
Brenda Coleman on behalf of the California Association of Wine Grape Growers. And if I may really quickly, Mr. Chair, from a grower's perspective, we're really concerned about what the impacts will be down the supply chain, which in many instances, these are small businesses, and so the impact that will be passed down from the large manufacturers all the way down is of great concern for wine grape growers. Thank you.
Charles McIntyre, President, West Coast Protective League. I represent the union glass workers here in the state of California. I myself and am also a glass worker. We're afraid that this bill is going to be a job killer. We're already in a tough competitive market here in California, and we see that the added costs and the problems with this bill could potentially put us out of work. So with that, thank you.
Mike Velasco, Wine Institute, we also oppose. I'll just make one comment that was not said before. To the best of our knowledge, the consumer products that pose serious risks are regulated. The author needs to identify those products that are not subject to state or federal regulation right now. If those products should be identified for some type of regulatory framework, but otherwise the bill is just layering on inappropriately more regulation and risk cost for employers. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Dane Hutchings with the California Grocers Association, in opposition. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Dawn Kepke with McHugh Kepke and Associates on behalf of the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States, also in opposition. Thank you.
Trudy Hughes with the California League of Food Processors, in opposition to the bill.
Thank you. Anyone else in opposition? Questions or comments from any of the members? Senator Manning?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I want to thank the author. I do think this is an important conversation, and as Senator Saulnier mentioned, we had a hearing in Budget Sub 3 trying to look at some of the cost shifting where taxpayers in the state of California are shouldering the burden of the cost, particularly of health care, for people suffering from preventable disease. So I think the conversation is important to say it's not focused on a particular industry or manufacturer. It's to better understand when and where cost shifting is happening. We should be informed of that as a legislature. And the Public Health Department with federal public health agencies are monitoring what are being described as public health epidemics, trends of obesity, of preventable diabetes, of heart disease. So I think as a legislature, the people we represent expect us to at least pursue this conversation in partnership with businesses. I think those that are the most regulated will be the most insulated from, should be insulated from concerns. Alcohol is highly regulated, tobacco. Some of our greatest public health successes have been with government regulation and oversight, particularly of tobacco, the taxation of tobacco, and the public education campaigns promoted with that revenue have reduced lung cancers, the leading killer of men in this state, to ranking now number 10. So there's some proven public health successes, and I just want to thank the author. Again, I share some of the concerns raised by opponents, but I think it's a conversation that we need to continue to have, and as members of the legislature, we have a responsibility to have this conversation. So I thank the author for bringing it forward. Don't know what its fate is likely to be today, but I think it's, regardless of where this bill goes, this is a conversation that is not going to disappear. The public health cost is one index here. Cost is associated with money. Quality of life is perhaps the ultimate concern of our constituents and the people we represent. So thank you.
I believe Senator Wolk had a question or comment.
A comment. Senator Saulnier, I apologize for not getting to you before about this bill. We've had other things on our mind, you and I. And, you know, I agree with what my colleague said about the conversation. As I looked at this, I'm afraid I'm not going to be with you today on this bill. I have concerns about the Department of Public Health. I have concerns about the breadth of it. I read it thoroughly, and I looked at the amends. It's a conversation that, in my view, is a long one and should probably happen before a bill. So I'm afraid I can't join you today.
That was the nicest rejection I've had from my seatmate.
Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, I do have a comment. I understand and I applaud you for bringing this forward. I believe it has merit. I also am unable to support the bill in its current form, and let me explain why that is. Yes, it's true that it potentially is the new frontier. You know, there is many of environmental conditions which affect health, and there was also a comment that was made is we need to get to the root of the cause. Well, when I look at this, if we're looking at products, I think products are one of a multitude of causes. So if we're really going to have a serious conversation, it can't just include the product. It has to include the environment. It has to include the household. It has to include the education. It has to include demographics. It has to include, you know, are they getting the right food? Is there healthy foods in the community? Is the kid that's obese just because they drink too many sodas, or is it because they're sitting on TV watching video games and not doing any exercises? So yes, this needs to be part of the discussion, but I don't think it encompasses the entire discussion. I don't know the fate either of the bill. I commend you for bringing it forward, and yes, we do have to have the conversation, but I, at this point, am not prepared to support the bill in its current form. So with that, would you like to close?
I would. Well, I'll try to be brief, and I really do appreciate the time and the thoughtful consideration, and I hope it moves forward because I'd like to continue the conversation. I obviously won't be able to move it very far with the current broad opposition to it, and I think there are some legitimate concerns. I would do everything possible to more closely make sure that there's no private right of action. The overburden, the regulation, the bill is currently designed, again, under a very high threshold. It has to be an epidemic. It has to contribute these products have to contribute $50 million to the state of California's public health system. So there's a material significant effect on our budget because of this. In terms of, and it is a challenge, all of page 3 in terms of what is a contributing product, section B, credible evidence means peer-reviewed research, data, and studies currently available to the department, so it's not new. The manufacturers have to provide, again, remember that this is all, they don't have to respond. First of all, the public health officer has to meet these high thresholds of academic and costs, or epidemic and costs, and then the public health officer may write a letter. There's no requirement in this legislation that says that anybody has to respond to it at all. It's all that they may respond to it. If they do, then they have to include some kind of mitigation. So to the chair's point, if you use other instances, for instance, CEQA, a reasonable mitigation to a negative impact on the environment under mitigation, this doesn't have a private right of action, so it would be up to the public health officer to determine this, but it could be education. The soda industry could say, we want to put labeling on our cans because it's educational, and give that to the public health officer and say, we think this might decrease the impacts as defined. So all of those things have the opportunity, in my view, have to be part of the discussion, as you say. If you get more exercise, you'll be better. And we're doing that. The former public health director under the Schwarzenegger administration helped with the resolution that Bruce talked about as health in all policies, and that's really helped quite a bit. So I would say this is one small step. It's a first step. I would really appreciate I vote to keep the conversation moving. I am not, in spite of all political evidence to the contrary and what I may be pursuing in my professional life, I'm not delusional. I know this is going to be hard, but I'd like to have the opportunity to engage the opposition. And then I think completely accurately described by the Chamber of Commerce, there has to be a cost benefit. We don't want to lose jobs, but with the current status quo, we're losing not jobs because it's costing us to administer these transferred costs. We're losing life and life expectancy. So I appreciate the conversation. Sorry, I've tried to be brief, but as you can tell, I feel strongly about this, and I know that you do as well. And I do appreciate the comments by everyone, including you, Mr. Chair, that the conversation will continue.
Thank you. Is there a motion?
Yes, I'll move the bill in the support of this important conversation. Thank you.
It's a motion by Senator Manning. This is due pass as amended to environmental quality. Call the members.
Hernandez?
No.
Hernandez, no. Anderson? Bell? Bell, aye. De Leon? DeSaulnier?
Aye.
DeSaulnier, aye. Manning?
Aye.
Manning, aye. Nielsen? Pavley? Wolk? No. Wolk, no.
That currently has 3. We have some absent members. We're going to put this bill on call. That'll move us to item number 2, SB 508. That is my bill. We don't have a Republican member here. I will turn the gavel over to my left to, if you don't mind, Senator Wolk. You mind running the committee?
All right, we are now at SB 508, the chair's bill. Item number 2. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. This bill, SB 508, is a follow-up bill to the 2 special session bills signed into law in June of last year to implement key provisions of the federal health care reform related to the Medi-Cal program. This bill makes 3 non-controversial changes. First, it places into state law the new Medi-Cal income eligibility levels. Legislation last year directed DHCS to establish these amounts administratively. This bill places these percentages into state law so people know what they are, existing state law contains in these amounts. Second, the bill repeals the deprivation requirements for the medically needy Medi-Cal category. This is consistent with the legislature's intent last year and addresses a concern raised by CMS. And third and finally, this bill clarifies the language implementing the former foster youth expansion provision in response to a concern raised by CMS. And with that, I respectfully ask for your aye vote. I do have some individuals here who would like to speak in support of the measure, Madam Chair and members.
All right, witnesses in support?
Madam Chair and members, Elizabeth Landsberg with the Western Center on Law and Poverty. Pleased to be here in support. These are technical changes, but the applications are being processed with these new what are called MAGI income levels, so these are important to go ahead and put into state law. We appreciate the Chair's leadership in implementing the Affordable Care Act, which has meant this month 1 million new Californians getting Medi-Cal coverage, as well as 400,000 folks on the exchange. So these are technical but important changes, and we urge your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Further witnesses in support?
Kelly Brooks Lindsay on behalf of the California State Association of Counties and the County Welfare Directors Association. We are in support of the bill. Counties have been working very diligently to implement the law. We acknowledge that we're bound to find other technical issues as we move forward in this process. And the changes contained in SB 508 are important clarifications to make sure that the policies that were intended are actually what is implemented. Thank you.
Thank you. Further support?
Michelle Cabrera with SEIU California in support.
Sean South with the California Primary Care Association in support.
Okay. Are there any more witnesses in support? Are there witnesses in opposition? All right, hearing none. Questions from the committee? Is there a motion?
Move the bill.
All right, the bill has been moved. Please call the roll.
Hernandez.
Aye.
Hernandez, aye. Anderson. Bell. Bell, aye. De Leon. Desagne. Desagne, aye. Monning. Monning, aye. Nielsen. Pavley. Wolk.
Aye, and I forgot to ask you to close. Mr. Chair.
That's last time
And
you
the
ever
roll?
get to close in this
What
committee.
is it? 5-0. That has enough to leave the committee, and we'll leave the roll open for the absent members.
Sergeants, if we can get the absent members here so we can lift the calls, because I believe everyone here has already voted on all the issues. You're more than welcome to leave if you like, and I'll just wait here.
Very nice.
Okay, we're going to lift a call on the bills. SB 280, Lou, call the absent members.
Anderson, De Leon, Nielsen, Pavley, aye.
It currently has 6. Still enough to get out. We're going to put that bill back on call. Item number 2, SB 508, call the absent members.
Anderson, De Leon, Nielsen, Pavley, aye.
That currently has 6, enough to get out. We'll put that back on call. Item number 3, SB 596, call the absent members.
Anderson, De Leon, Nielsen, Pavley, aye.
Has enough to get out. We'll still put that bill back on call. Item number 4, SB 747, call the absent members.
Anderson, De Leon, Nielsen, Pavley,
Comment first. This bill particularly is going to be very difficult to move forward and problematically. There's problems in the implementation. I will be getting a courtesy vote today to have the discussion continued, but even though I appreciate consumer responsibility on products, but I'm not sure how this is workable the way it's constructed. And it needs a lot of work to be done, and let alone the potential litigation side of the whole issue. So for today, because sometimes I ask that of my fellow members, courtesy vote in order the member can continue to work on the bill. Pavley, aye.
Pavley, aye.
That's 4-2. Still short of vote. We'll put that bill back on call. Item number 5, AB 485, call the absent members.
Anderson, De Leon, Nielsen, Pavley,
Aye.
aye.
Currently 6-0. That has enough votes. We'll put that bill back on call. Okay, we're going to lift the calls. Item number 1, SB 280,
Anderson,
call the absent members.
Anderson, De Leon,
Aye.
De Leon, aye. Nielsen,
That's 7-0. Vote, that bill is out. Item number 2, SB 508, call the absent members.
Anderson, De Leon, De Leon, aye. Nielsen,
That's 7-0. That bill is out. Item number 3, SB 596, call the absent members.
Anderson, De Leon, De Leon, aye. Nielsen,
That's 7-0. Bill is out. Item number 4, SB 747, call the absent members.
Anderson, De Leon, De Leon, aye. Nielsen,
It's 5-2. That bill is out. Item number 5, AB 485, call the absent members.
Anderson, De Leon, De Leon, aye. Nielsen,
7-0. That bill is out. That concludes the business of the day, and we are adjourned.